Imagine for a moment a world without art, without dance, opera, literature, poetry. That world would be a very, very dull place.
Today on the show, we have Bob Mcleod, a bona fide Hall of Fame comic art legend who is best known for co-creating Marvel Comics' The New Mutants with writer Chris Claremont. Bob's illustrious credentials include both doing either pencils or inks for The Incredible Hulk, Conan the Barbarian, Legion of Superheroes Action Comics, Detective Comics, Wonder Woman, New Titans, Star Wars, Spider-Man. If it's been in a comic book, you know he's inked it. Bob, thanks for coming on the show.
Very happy to be here. Yeah, there's a lot of characters that have come along since my heyday that I had nothing to do with, but yeah, during my career, I got around to all the major players.
Yeah, you've actually, I mean, as far as a wide range of different characters, you've pretty much at one point or another either drawn or inked every major comic book character out there, and that's got to make you feel accomplished to have your finger in that many pies.
It really does. I was very fortunate. I jumped around a lot, often trying to find a schedule where I could pencil and ink myself.
Mhm.
But I enjoyed inking other artists as well, and interesting to see other artists ink my pencils. And I just had a very nice career.
Yeah, and it's something about, I don't know, just your generation of comic book artists, those guys that came up in like, I would say the mid 60s to like, I don't know, maybe 1980, like before the Bronze Age really kicked in, where you guys had the ability to kind of, get mentored under some of these, titans in the industry. Man, that old school method of just penciling and straight inking just never looked better than any other era of comics. And I'm an independent publisher, writer myself, and a lot of the artists that I work with, they just use Photoshop, a lot of these, newer kind of platforms. But I mean, nothing stands out and nothing has the artistry like that old school pencil and ink feel.
Thanks very much. I'm glad you appreciate it. I obviously feel the same way. There's a lot of amazing artwork being done today, but like you say, they're using computer programs for backgrounds a lot of times, different things. It's digital art has just changed the whole business really. And that's fine for what it is, but I really like the old pencil and ink on paper.
Yeah, same here. I actually for once I get this graphic novel I'm working on done, the next project that I was looking at was going to be more kid friendly, and it was just kind of going to be my love letter to the Silver Age in general. And I have been shopping around for artists just because I don't want to have that computerized look. I want to have it hand drawn, hand inked, and when you have someone that's into that kind of style of artwork, it really shows their dedication as an artist, because nowadays people can take the easy way out, but when you find someone that's still dedicated and still has an appreciation for that old method of doing things, I mean, I feel like it really denotes something about their character as an individual.
Yeah, I don't know. My generation, we weren't so interested in looking for the easy way out. We were trying to compete with our heroes, all the people that came before us and set the standards, way back to Hal Foster on Prince Valiant, and Alex Raymond, Flash Gordon, all those guys. We looked up to them, and we're trying to measure up to them instead of just finding the fastest way to do a page and make some money.
Yeah, and I guess to kind of start off at the beginning of your career, I guess my first question would be for you is what made you, as an individual, want to get into comics? Was there like a specific character that kind of resonated with you as a kid? Were you more into comics? Were you more into like the pulp novels, and then later kind of developed into it? What was your first inspiration for wanting to get into that business?
I never intended to be in the comic book business. I wanted to have my own newspaper comic strip. I'm more of a humor artist, and actually submitted a newspaper strip about a humorous private detective named Tom Nosey to King Features back when I was 19, and got rejected for good reasons. It was pretty amateurish. Um, but that was my goal, either that or do some work for Mad Magazine. My hero was Mort Drucker doing the TV and movie satires,
Oh yeah.
and maybe end up at Disney working in the animated movies. Um, I I mean, I read Superman comics mainly as a kid, and Archie comics, but I was not that into comic books. I was more into humor stuff, like I said. But I was stocking shelves at a grocery store, and this guy I was working next to was a huge Marvel Comics fan. And when he found out I could draw, he said, "Oh, you got to work for Marvel Comics." And so I thought, well, maybe that might be a place to start. And so it's really just because of that guy. I sold my car, financed a trip up to New York, and try to start a career. And it was the time of the New York Comic Con in the summer. And, I submitted my work there trying to get some work. And I was so naive, I figured, well, I'll just show them my samples and they'll say, "Oh, you're great. Here you go. Here's a Spider-Man script," or whatever. And of course, it didn't work out like that. I got rejected, and happened to meet another artist, Pat Broderick, who also was in my actual hometown art class in Tampa, Florida. He was a year younger than me, so we didn't really socialize, but I knew he was in the class. But I bumped into him at the convention, and we became roommates. And he met Neil Adams at DC and introduced me to Neil. And Neil got me a job in the production department at Marvel, doing basically paste up and mechanicals is what it used to be called, lettering corrections. I actually taped the page numbers onto the pages of art. So I figure I pretty much started at the bottom and worked my way up.
Wow. I mean, that's a heck of a recommendation, though, being able to, get that foot in the door through Neil Adams, because I mean, as far as like, Batman goes, there's no one more prolific. As far as, kind of their take on the, I mean, I guess if you wanted to talk about like the gritty reboot with like Frank Miller and that, but like, I don't know, as far as like classic Batman goes, Neil Adams is always the first guy that comes to mind for me. So I guess did you get a chance to kind of meet Neil, get to know him when you first started socializing, or was it more of a business, mentor mentee kind of relationship?
No, he wasn't really a mentor, but I rented studio space with Neil at Continuity Studios,
Mhm.
where he did a lot of advertising work and also his comics work. And he would rent out little office space, drawing table and what have you, to various artists. And so I was just renting space there and looking over his shoulder as he worked. And Russ Heath was there, and I was looking over Russ' shoulder, and Dick Giordano, Larry Hama, Ralph Reese, a lot of comic artists, Jack Abel. I could watch them work and pick up some tips, and it was a great way to actually get my foot in the door of the business and meet people, and just see how the good stuff was done.
Wow. I mean, just with the artists that you named, that is so much talent in one studio. So was that studio that you were renting out with these guys? That was in New York after you had made the transition up, or was that still down in Tampa?
No, it was in New York. You had to be in New York at that time to work in the business, basically. All the DC and Marvel Charlton, all the companies were in New York City, and it was almost, I don't know anybody that was getting work that was outside of New York really at that time. And so this was 1974.
Mhm.
And so I just got a room with Pat, an apartment with Pat, and then was renting space at Neil's for, I don't know, about 3 or 4 years.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, you really, I mean, instead of going like, the traditional like art school route, you actually got hands-on experience working with, some of the most active artists of the day. So I guess, when you were like working with them, was there any specific artist that kind of like really took you under their wing and kind of showed you how to do certain things, how to, shade with certain inks, that sort of stuff?
I started out in the production department at Marvel, and at that time, Mike Esposito, a longtime inker for Marvel, was sitting like 2 feet away from me. Frank Giacoya, another longtime inker, on the other side of me, and they would, talk to me about the business and about inking. And Mike Esposito actually said, you can learn to be an inker faster than you can learn to be a penciler. Because at that time I was a humor artist. I didn't know anything about the dramatic comics, hardly knew who Neil Adams or Jack Kirby or John Romita were. I was more into Mad Magazine.
Mhm.
So I started doing inking backgrounds for Mike Esposito. And being right there in the Marvel office, I met Al Milgram and Klaus Janson, started doing backgrounds for them. And like, a month or two later, I got offered my own inking jobs, and my inking career kind of took off from there. And that's when I read space over at Continuity with Neil. And Neil taught me a couple things, basically just to kind of slow down and take care with each line that you make as an inker. Um, I don't remember him teaching me specific stuff too much, but he would just look at my stuff and either nod, say good job, or not not say anything. And he never gave me a bad critique the way he has a lot of other people. So I was lucky there.
I mean, well, that's good. I mean, I don't know, because like I feel like that's one of the things that kind of I don't want to call it a negative thing, because some people definitely need a very strict critique to improve. But I mean, I've noticed that, particularly like the con scenes, a lot of like these up and coming artists will, go up to some of these more established artists, looking for tips, advice, how to get into the industry. And, granted, it's a good portion of it is just because they get asked that question and to look over, portfolios over and over and over again. But man, you get some of these artists that it's almost like their critiques are out for blood. You know what I mean? You're never gonna
Yeah.
make it in this business. Look at that. Look at that. That's amateurish. And it's just like, no, I get it, but you got to remember that you were once in their shoes, and you have to kind of work with them, and be strict in that critique, but also kind of be encouraging at the same token.
Yeah, I try very hard to do that. I've critiqued a lot of people at shows, and I always try to give them as much advice to get them up to that next level as I can. I'm not out there to make them cry or to send them home discouraged. I'm trying to make them see what they don't know and what they do know. And I point out what they do know and what they're doing well. But most of the time, you got to make them realize they really need to learn anatomy. They really need to think about composition and where they're putting things. And they really need to look at what other artists are doing instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and just start everything from scratch. Try to kind of emulate your favorite artist at first. And then your own style is going to grow out of that because you're not that other person, you're who you are. Your own style is going to come out. But it's the fastest way to learn is really to try to copy someone else.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not much of a comic artist, but I do a lot of like painting, acrylics, oils, and stuff. And that is one of the reasons why I absolutely love Bob Ross is I was able to just sit and mimic everything he does. And you pick up a lot when you actually like follow along step by step with him. And I mean, when you're mimicking the work, from any artist, right? But I mean, yeah, just going back to what you were saying, anatomy is hard primarily when you have to have, I mean, coming from a penciling standpoint, when you have to have that kind of cinematic view of angles, how to kind of make those angles continuously fresh and changing, so you don't just have the same panel, showing a face, saying something, really change it up. And when you start like looking at the human body and a lot of those different angles, it's kind of hard to get those proportions right at first, and it just takes a lot of trial and error. And I think that's what separates those amateur artists from those people who want to be professional, right? The professionals are going to work through the pain.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much to learn. I mean, I started out as a humor artist. I had to learn storytelling. I had to learn anatomy. I had to learn perspective. I had to learn lighting and costuming and posing. There's just so much you have to learn. So my penciling kind of lagged behind my inking. Took me about 5 years longer to get my penciling career going than my inking career, because inking, all that stuff was there, and I just had to use my drawing skills to make it pretty and do nice line work, So penciling though, that there's a lot to learn.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And yeah, whenever I've stepped in to help out with any of our artists, I'm always just doing inking. I can't pencil to save my life. I mean, not the scale that we would need. But I guess kind of to take a step back. So, what was your first official inking job that you had? On an ongoing series with Marvel?
My first series was the Black Panther, inking Billy Graham. Uh, and Don McGregor was writing it, featured the storyline about the Ku Klux Klan. So it was pretty
Mhm.
political and uh, dramatic, kind of ahead of its time in a sense for the politics. Um, Billy Graham was a difficult artist to ink because he was very sketchy and loose. A lot of stuff going on there that you didn't want to have in the inks necessarily. It needed to be cleaned up.
Mhm.
So
So like
very interesting. Pardon?
yeah, I was gonna say, so like, are you talking like a lot of like hatching, cross hatching kind of a thing that you just had to cover
No,
up with solids?
no, just kind of rough drawing, where he'd have like 6 lines instead of one, and he'd have just indicated kind of scribbling where he wanted some kind of rendering. A lot of the pencilers at that time weren't penciling to be traced. They were penciling to give the inker like a starting point, and then they wanted to ink the inker to bring in a style of rendering and kind of add to the art instead of just going over the art with ink.
Hmm. Huh. Now, no, I guess I mean that is just just straight up the one of the first characters to have a regular run with. Man, Black Panther is bold. Did you get to? Did you? Was it your decision to choose that one, or is that just the first series that you were offered on the regular?
That was just first one that I was offered. I was just around when they needed an inker on it. I said, I'll take that. So just timing, being there in the right place, the right time.
Yeah, I mean the thing that I think is the thing that I think that separates Black Panther from a lot of other characters is just the sense of how personal he is to their fans. You know what I mean? So let me ask you: have you ever had, any particular? I mean, I would imagine within the African American community, just kind of share with you their, at a con or otherwise, just share with you their connection to that character.
I was on a panel at a con about the Black Panther with other artists that had been on the comic, but that was just kind of a question and answer panel at a Comic-Con, just talking to the fans, I've never had anybody really ask me about the Black Panther in that respect, but I have with the New Mutants, when I co-created some of the New Mutant characters. There was a dark-skinned character, Roberto da Costa, Sunspot, who is half Brazilian and half white and dark-skinned. And I've had a lot of fans come up to me and tell me how important he was to them as a young comic fan reading that and identifying with him, and seeing someone with dark skin in the comics meant a lot to them.
Yeah, I will say that's one of the things that I feel makes comics special is that, well, I mean, first off, representation matters, right? Within the media, of certain, like, minority groups, oppressed groups, like representation matters, and it makes you feel like you're more included in the culture and the society at large. And I think one of the things that makes comics so special is that over the years, they were one of the first mainstream mediums to actually start incorporating minority characters and really starting to tell their stories, and stories that would be important to these communities.
Yeah, and you can thank Stan Lee for that to a large degree. And Chris Claremont certainly was working hard with the X-Men and the New Mutants in that direction. A lot of people up at Marvel. I think DC maybe a little later to the game in that respect, but also bringing in some ethnic characters and minorities. So yeah, comics were, I don't know if they were ahead of the time, but they were trying to be there at the times.
Yeah, trying to be more in tune with the moment, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think that's what made him kind of fresh and edgier. And I don't want to say hip, right? But hipper with young audiences is the fact that comics, they actually gave validation to a lot of these political issues that that were important to the youth at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. It was great to see. There was a lot of interest. They had a drug storyline in Green Lantern, Green Arrow at DC. Like I said, they had the Ku Klux Klan with the Black Panther. They were trying to do a lot of political stuff and a lot of stories out of the headlines at the time. And up until the 70s, comics were pretty white. So it was good to see some minority characters being introduced about the time I started in the comics. Hold on, that's my daughter calling. I can talk to her later.
Don't worry.
Molly, let me call you later. I'm doing an interview.
Okay, all right, bye.
Bye. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. So let me ask you, when you guys were, working on these more, I don't want to say politically trendy, but that's the word I'm going to use. Did you guys have any direct influence from Stan, or later on in your career with Marvel, did you get to work with him on any specific characters or stories?
Stan, when he was writing the comics, he would talk to the artist and have direct influence. But when I started there were a lot of other people taking over the writing reins from Stan and kind of under his direction, and he would talk to them. And so you would get like secondhand opinions from Stan through John Romita or through the editor-in-chief or the editor of the book. But an awful lot of the time as an artist, you would just be handed a plot or a script and told to draw it, and that's about all the communication you had with them.
So I guess when you had started then, what was the culture like there at Marvel? And then I guess, as you went to work for DC as well, how did that corporate culture kind of differ between Marvel and DC?
Oh, in the old days, there was a big difference. When I started at Marvel, it was almost like a little family-run business. It was very small. Stan's office was like just around the corner down the hall from where I was working. John Romita's office was 10 feet away. Marie Severin was there down the hall. but there was like, what, 10 people around, 10 or 15 people, and that was the Marvel office, and you could come and go as you pleased, hang around all day and just talk to the editors or your friends or whatever. Artists would come and go. It was very friendly, open atmosphere. And then you go up to DC at that time, and it was much more corporate, kind of a cooler atmosphere, not as friendly and welcoming. A lot of the editors and artists there were older, where there seemed to be more younger people at Marvel. But then over the years, there was a lot of cross-pollination. So a lot of editors and writers and artists went from Marvel to jobs at DC and vice versa. And for a while, DC was the cool place to be, and Marvel was a little more corporate at times. So it's changed over the decades back and forth quite a bit.
So now do you think that was, just due to, kind of DC being like the key player earlier on, and then Marvel kind of gaining that momentum in 60s and 70s, and then it probably wasn't until Crisis at Infinite Earth that DC kind of started to come back and become more relevant, because there was a time there when just Marvel was just on fire. And granted that it kind of fluctuates back and forth between the two, but did you notice a specific change in those cultures as kind of the decades went on?
Yeah, it was because when DC saw Marvel having such success, they approached the writers and artists at Marvel and say, hey, why don't you come work for us? Trying to steal them away, and get some of that magic. And some of them did go over and talk to the old timers at DC and said, hey, you need to start doing this that they're doing at Marvel. And it's a younger audience now. And they're interested in this kind of storyline where the heroes actually have problems. And so DC started imitating Marvel to a degree, and then coming up with their own ideas. And then Marvel would see what DC was doing and try to steal artists from them. So it was a lot of competition, a lot of it friendly, some of it not so friendly. They had a couple crossovers where Marvel and DC were co-publishers with Spider-Man and Superman. For some comics and things like that. So it's just people looking for work and trying to do good stuff and make money and be popular, and they fed off each other.
Yeah, I guess that's just in the nature of competition, right? Is that, the art tends to stagnate when that competition isn't there. And, when you have a good competitor, it just pushes you to kind of bring out that, that quality work, right? So I guess let me ask you, when it comes to, I guess your personal opinion, versus like the, more like open, like smaller family style and the more corporate environment, which one do you think is more conducive to creativity in your mind?
For creative business, I think it's better to have a friendlier atmosphere, where you're not worried about having to do something you don't want to do, where you have more artistic freedom. So the Marvel method of drawing from a plot, for instance, allows the artist to contribute to this visual storytelling and decide how many panels to put on a page and when to start the next page, and what camera angles to use and all that, as opposed to a finished script, which was more often done at DC, telling the artist exactly how many panels and exactly where to put a close up and where to put a long shot. All that kind of stuff is a little more stifling and prohibiting. So I think it's better the more freedom you have as a creator. I think the work's going to usually benefit from that.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you on that one, because I know creativity, comes from like a place that's in the moment, you know what I mean? And a lot of those decisions that you make as an artist just come from that kind of gut feeling. So I guess let me ask you. So you started off as an inker, and you said it would have been about 5 years before you actually got into penciling. So in that time, was there a couple of different series that you worked on before you were able to get into penciling?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was becoming a really busy inker in the late 70s. I worked on, God, what did I do before I started penciling? I did a lot of fill-ins, um, Spider-Man fill-ins, and geez, it's so long ago. I was inking the Defenders. I was inking Son of Satan. I was inking over Sal Buscema a lot. I was inking a little over John Buscema, um,
Mhm.
Val Mayerick on Frankenstein. Um, Again, jumping around quite a bit. So I worked on a lot of different characters with a lot of different pencilers. I didn't stay on one series usually very long at all in those days, really all through my career, but especially early on, I was just jumping all over the place.
Oh wow! So it sounds like they just kind of had you as the utility player in the office.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, there would be certain artists that would just stay on a book for a decade, you know. Same artist would be drawing Fantastic Four and inking for 10, 15 years. Whereas around the time that I came in and definitely following me, that started to change, and they started rotating art teams and having you move around a lot more. And part of that was the artist's choice. There was so many different books that everybody wanted to work on, that they didn't want to stay on one book all the time. And then part editorial sometimes just wanted to change, a little of both.
I mean, that seems like it's a good way to keep it fresh, though, too. You know what I mean? So people just don't get, I don't know, like trapped in the motions of just doing, one character day in day out, one story day in day out. Being able to switch it up, you can, because like there's a heck of a world of a difference between drawing Spider-Man and drawing the Hulk, right? If you've been drawing the Hulk for over a year, you kind of you kind of got those kind of action splash pages down and those different kinds of like panels down. But with Spider-Man, man, there's so many different angles and ways that you can contort the body and change it up. So I mean, I don't know, did you think that benefited the art in general?
You know, some artists are less flexible. They might be really good on one type of character and not that good on another type of character. Um, so some artists didn't like, doing, say, those are two good examples. The Hulk and Spider-Man are very different. You can be a very good Hulk
Yeah.
artist and just not quite get Spider-Man, not quite feel comfortable putting him in those positions. Um, I think John Buscema was the top artist at Marvel in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, and he was so good on in so many ways on so many different characters. I don't think Spider-Man was his best character, and then some of the Spider-Man artists were so good on him, but not so good on some of the other characters. I tried to draw each character differently and try to determine what was fun and interesting about that character and try to put that into my drawings. Um, I think it helped me to be more of a cartoonist than a standard comic book artist because it made me a little more flexible.
Yeah, I feel like being flexible is, I mean, that's got to be the key, right? To having longevity in that kind of a business, particularly as an artist. So let me ask you, after you had, finally gotten into penciling, what were some of the first few titles that you worked on? And was there any particular uh, title or character as a penciler that you just really, kind of vibed with and kind of fed off of?
Yeah, when I started penciling, my very first pencil job in the superhero comics was Spider-Man and the Guardians of the Galaxy and Marvel Team Up. And after that, I seemed to do a lot of Spider-Man fill-ins. So I enjoyed drawing Spider-Man, and I guess they liked what I was doing on Spider-Man. I did some others, I'm sure, but those are the ones that come to mind with my penciling. And then uh, finally got a shot at doing the X-Men. I did a couple fill-in issues on the X-Men, and that's what gave them, got them to offer me the New Mutants, was they liked what I did on the X-Men.
Yeah. Now,
And the New
New
Mutants was
Mutants.
really,
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say New Mutants was really my first penciling series.
Okay. Okay. So just that consistency with being the penciler for a series, right?
Yeah, it's very different. Especially with the New Mutants, I was a co-creator, so I was determining what those characters look like. And I created them exactly the way I wanted them. And then it was up to me to keep them looking that way all the time, from, like you say, from every angle and pose. And I wanted them to look like young kids who just were average people who happened to become superheroes, not especially attractive people like Superman and Wonder Woman. So it was fun for me trying to make them individuals, where some other comic artists like doing that basic stereotype superhero face, and then you just change the hair color to make it look like a different character or whatever. Every artist is a little different.
Yeah, I mean, New Mutants is probably the title that kind of rings out the most for you. Now, let me ask you, what was the creative process like working with Chris Claremont on that? Was he open to suggestions? Did you guys kind of work with each other well?
Yeah, Chris is very good about being open and listening to suggestions and ideas. He's got so many ideas bursting out of him all the time. He's so creative, but he's very open to your creativity as well. So we had a lot of phone conversations. Most of the time I was living in Tampa and he was in New York while we were working on the book. But I flew up to New York occasionally, and we would talk in person. But we discussed a lot back and forth. It was a good collaboration, I thought.
Awesome. So let me ask you, did you on that first visit up, did you get a shirt from him? Because I know his wife likes to make all those shirts.
No, I did not. What kind of shirts did she make?
Oh, she from what I understand, she just makes these kind of like wild button ups with like all sorts of different kinds of like zany fabrics. And I don't know, I just heard it was something that Chris would always give to people. He'd have his wife make him a shirt, kind of just like a hello present. Though that could have been something that was that they started doing like later on in life.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I was down in Florida, so maybe he never really got the opportunity to do that with me.
So when you were working with Chris on the New Mutants, and I mean, New Mutants, it's one of those comic series that just kind of like it kind of like hit the nail on the head as far as like youth culture was at the time, which is why I think it was so prevalent. So many people kind of resonated with it because similar to what the X-Men did, kind of finding what was important to youth culture in the 60s, New Mutants was able to do in the 80s and 90s. So what do you think it was about the New Mutants that made that series so successful?
Well, from what I've been told, the fans really liked the fact that they could identify with the characters as teenagers. They liked the fact that they were young teenagers instead of adults. They liked the fact that there was some diversity among the team and they just weren't 5 white guys. they liked the fact that at that time, you know, they were different from the other comics around. You know, the whole thing with Marvel is they kept coming up with something a little different. You know, when Spider-Man came out, there were no other insect characters around, you know.
Mhm.
When the Hulk came out, there were no other big gigantic bruisers like him around. So Marvel managed to keep coming up with these things that were new in a sense, in one way or another. And with the New Mutants, it was that the young characters that they could picture themselves being, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess well, I guess that's you know, really what made like Spider-Man and the original X-Men series stand out so much as well, is that, you know, it kind of gave kids someone to identify with. I mean, you know, similar, I guess, to what we were talking about with Black Panther and minority communities as well. So I guess let me ask you, just because you worked on one of my all-time favorite Spider-Man stories of all time, Craven's Last Hunt. So let me ask you, what was that creative process like? Did you have the ability to kind of, you know, add your own flavor to that? And you know, as far as storytelling and, you know, how the different panels were laid out?
Yeah, that was a very interesting job. It was terrific because it was going over all three Spider-Man titles at the time. So we knew it was going to be a special deal. And Mike Zeck and I were friends, and I had inked him several times on other projects. So I was comfortable inking his pencils. But well, he started out doing incredibly tight pencils for him, very detailed. And I was mostly just trying to clean it up. You know, pencils again aren't meant to be traced, so there's a lot involved in inking, even when pencils are tight, just making it look as good as I could. And I'm more, my anatomy is a little more realistic than Mike's, so I would tend to adjust his anatomy more to my thinking as I was inking a little bit. But then kind of midway through that series, Mike, I think, got busy on other things as well. And for deadline purposes, he switched over to penciling breakdowns, which are more bare bones with no lighting and rendering, just basic storytelling, which allowed me to
Mhm.
take over and decide what to do with the lighting and really uh, contribute more to finishing up the drawing. So the last three issues are a lot more my contribution than the first three, but I tried to keep it kind of looking consistent throughout at the same time.
Yeah, and I could see the consistency being hard on that book too, lighting wise, just because, you know, you got the scenes with, like, the different like lightning flashes. And did you run into was it hard kind of keeping that consistent just with the different types of scenes involved?
That was the easy part. All you had to do was make it dark and rainy for most of the pages. You know, it was raining on almost every page. I got so tired of inking rain. And then down in the sewers with vermin, just a lot of rendering up the sewers. So that part was pretty simple. Mike kind of set the stage early on for what kind of stuff he wanted to see, and I just kind of kept going with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess when you guys were working on it, did you have any idea of the longevity that that specific story would have, and its you know, relation to kind of suicide awareness?
Well, I mean, it was certainly dramatic to have a suicide in the storyline, and we knew that was something that was going to get some attention and maybe some media attention. We knew it was going to uh, be a fan favorite because we were all kind of at the top of our game. You know, DeMatteis and Mike and I were all doing what we thought was pretty good work. And Rick Parker, the letterer, was doing some great stuff. So we were very happy with the quality of it. And when you have good quality work, it's usually going to make an impact. But we had no idea at all that it would still be talked about decades later and still be considered like one of the best Spider-Man stories ever, and everybody's fan favorite. I mean, we're all kind of still in shock that it's become the hallmark that it has.
Oh yeah. I mean, I would put that in man, top Spider-Man storylines, top 5 or even top 3 probably for me, just because of the personal connection. But yeah, no, that has become I mean, not only one of the definitive Spider-Man stories, but is absolutely the most definitive Craven the Hunter story. So let me ask you, was there any specific like Spider-Man's rogue gallery villains that you enjoyed working with or working on, I should say?
Well, let me just point out, I don't know if you know the story that the writer Mark DeMatteis originally took that story to DC, and DC rejected it. He wanted to do it as a Batman story, and he was going to have, I think,
Hmm.
Batman and the Joker maybe, but he just approached them at the wrong time when I think The Killing Joke was coming out or had just come out, and they thought it had too many maybe similarities with that, and so they turned him down. And so then he kind of reworked it and took it to Marvel as a Spider-Man story, but not with Craven. I think he had a different villain to start with, and they weren't that crazy about it either. And he just kind of it's a good story that you should get him to tell. He knows the details a lot better than I do, but he kind of then came upon Craven and noticed that not much had been done with Craven, and he thought he could make a different put a different slant on Craven and make him more interesting than he had been before, which he obviously did. So it kind of, that story just kind of took a long time to gel and to fall into place and become what it became. And it just is one of those things where it had to come across at the right time to finally work.
Yeah, I would say that I mean that it reinvented the Craven character. It made the Craven character relevant again
Yeah.
because I mean, there are Spider-Man villains that like come and go out of relevancy, right? And Craven, up until that point in my mind, he was always just kind of a throwaway villain, right? He didn't have a lot of depth to him, but that story in particular added a whole new level to that character. I mean, it almost made him more three-dimensional than anything else.
Yeah, it was amazing. He really did a great job with him. As far as other Spider-Man villains, I don't know. I've never been that fascinated with villains. I thought the Sandman was a kind of a fun villain to work with. Um, didn't like Green Goblin, particularly Vulture. I kind of like Doc Ock. He's always fun.
Yeah, it seems like with drawing the villains, you want a lot of options, right? I mean, Sandman, he can pretty much manipulate himself into, any kind of shape or implement, right? And same with Doc Ock. With those arms, you get the ability to like add different curves and designs and like, really kind of fill up a lot of empty space on panels. So I could see why an artist would be more drawn to those characters.
Yeah, the Vulture, Green Goblin. I mean, Green Goblin's kind of interesting visually, but some of the other villains just aren't that visually appealing. Speaking as a penciler. Um,
Hmm.
and my main interest in comics is really just figure drawing. I just like to draw people. It's not that I'm that big a fan of characters, individual characters. I mean, I like Spider-Man because, like you say, he gets in all these interesting poses that you can have a lot of fun with him visually. But I just basically like to draw people.
And I guess we kind of use that as a segue then. I guess which character or title, or I guess even run, did you enjoy working on the most, and which character did you really enjoy drawing the most from an artistic standpoint?
Well, like I said, as a kid, I read mainly Superman comics. So when I finally got the chance to pencil Superman, it was kind of like an honor to take over that book. And I enjoyed doing the whole line of secondary characters, Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane and Perry White and all those guys. Um, so I really enjoyed my time on Superman, and just wish that I'd been able to ink it all myself, because I always, like I said, I always wanted to ink my own pencils. Even though I had some good inkers on Superman and my other series, I was just never satisfied unless I was inking myself. But I had a good time on Superman.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, even though he doesn't get a lot of the respect that I feel he deserves nowadays from modern audiences, I mean, Superman is the OG comic book character. Like, he is the quintessential superhero in every facet. And I feel like most comic artists, like when they get the chance to work on Superman, they finally have that feeling that, they've made it, or they've accomplished, working on the great archetype.
Yeah, he's kind of the epitome in a sense. Certainly at DC, if you work at DC, you want to work on Superman. If you work at
Right.
Marvel, you want to work on Spider-Man. And I was lucky enough to do both of those.
So I guess I don't know, get kind of moving forward then. I guess let me ask you, what are your thoughts on the state of the industry now?
You know, back in the 90s, comics started taking a dark turn with, I guess, Frank Miller's Dark Knight. Um, Suddenly they were more violent. The stories were more adult and dark and grim. And I'm more of a humor guy. You know, I like the lighter stuff. And it just, I kind of started losing interest around that time, to where I quit reading the comics in the early 2000s. And so obviously I see comics around, going to conventions and talking to fans. I hear some stuff. Today's comics are just a world of difference from the 70s and 80s and 90s, where the bulk of my career. Um, like I said, digital has really changed the look of the art. It's changed the way that it's changed the artists that have entered the business. A lot of them are more illustrators than storytellers. So it's changed everything about the art of the comics. And then the stories are just, from what I hear from the fans, they just don't have the same, I don't know, interest that they used to have. They're either long sagas that you have to buy a lot of different titles just to keep up with the storyline, or there's just not a lot of story to it. It's mostly just action. I don't know. I don't read them, so I can't really say, but that's what I hear. A lot of fans are nostalgic for the older comics.
Yeah, I know I am, because I don't know, like I miss like the story arcs that were, your classic like 5 to 7 issues, right? That you could, gather those together in like, a graphic novel, or you could just buy, that run, right? And you'd get a complete story. And now it just seems that these stories, just kind of keep building and building and building and building, because and this is what I think, at least with the big major too, is that comics have just become a way to promote the movies, as opposed to the way the movies used to promote the comics, right?
Yeah, the movies really had a big impact, because that's where the big money is. Obviously, there's not that much money in publishing compared to movies, and so the comic publishers, I think, felt they had to make people who went to the movies recognize those characters when they went into a comic shop. And they didn't want the superheroes looking really different from the movie versions of them, because they thought then they would hurt sales. So they started making the costumes more like they are in the movies, copying different things from the movies. And they're really totally separate businesses, and each one has different demands. So I don't think that's necessarily a good idea. A costume that looks good in a movie is fine for a cover maybe, but when you have to draw it panel after panel from all different angles, all those tiny little details, it's just not sensible. There's a reason why we had more simple costumes back in the early days, because you're drawing so many panels with that figure over and over and over again, and a lot of them very small. It doesn't work to have a really complicated costume.
Yeah, I feel like with a lot of modern comics, I don't know, the panels just seem so crowded with detail, right? Like, I feel, I mean, and then this is probably just goes back to, that philosophy that less is more, right? You like you as someone viewing art, you tend to project your own experiences onto a story or onto a character. And I guess with like novelizations as well, like your imagination's always going to be more powerful than, the detail given to it. But yeah, I mean, from a practical standpoint, when you have, I mean, you just take like a boot, for example, you look at Captain America's old boot, a boot itself was just, a red boot, but now it's got shoelaces, it's got stitching. If he's like kicking, you're definitely going to see all the patterns of the sole of the boot underneath it and where it grips. I mean, it's just it's almost as if they're trying to mimic the detail of they're trying to mimic the detail of the movie, but it doesn't. I mean, you're never going to capture that kind of action with a movie in a comic book. Like you have to stick to the strengths of what the comic medium is.
Exactly. And a lot of like I was saying, a lot of those artists came over from illustration, because the illustration market has been slowly dying, being replaced by photography and Photoshop. And there aren't as many avenues for illustrators to get work. And then they see the comic book business kind of booming, and so they want a piece of that, and they come in, but they're used to doing really detailed drawings for an illustration that's going to be much bigger than a comic page. And they're not really educated in storytelling the way Jack Kirby was, and John Buscema was. The earlier artists that were all about telling a story visually. These guys are more interested in making pretty pictures, and there's different demands. Like I was saying, comic books have certain things that you need to do to make it work as a comic, and movies have certain things they need to do to make them work as movies, and they're different things.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, I feel like with the focus not on comic books, it's it not being well being more on movies than comics. I would say. I mean, don't want to say that these publishers aren't focused on their comics. They definitely are, but as a money making avenue, the movies are definitely where the bucks are at. And I feel with the focus on movies over comics, you're seeing less and less titles get published, and you're seeing the amounts of those books get reduced. And I fear that in my lifetime we might see, I don't want to say an end of comics as a medium, but we may see, the death of, this system that we know of comics as, annual monthly issues, and this long going storyline, might be diminished.
Yeah, there's always those rumors that the end is near, but the end was near when I entered the business back in '74. They were saying, well, comics won't even be around in 5 years. So, it's hard to say what's going to happen in the future, whether they'll keep publishing monthly comics, whether Marvel and DC will be relevant the way they are today, with so many new publishers. Graphic novels have taken a big foothold. The business is constantly evolving. Now you have books online in digital format instead of just print format. Um, there's web comics. So who knows what the future is going to hold. But listen, speaking of the future, my wife is saying dinner's about ready, so I'm going to have to take my leave.
Yeah, actually, I was gonna round this one up because I figured I'd only get you for an hour. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I think graphic novels are going to be the trend towards the future. Entire stories in one cover to cover. But my final question for you, and this will look towards the future of the industry, is what are your thoughts on what I guess up and comers would, or what suggestions would you give for those up and comers trying to get a foot in the industry these days?
I would say just get your work out there, try to get noticed. Try, like I said, to imitate people that you admire. Um, and Marvel gets so many submissions, they don't even have time to look at them. So they usually
Mhm.
look around at what's being self-published or what the smaller publishers are printing. And if they see someone they like, they contact them. So the way to do it nowadays is just get your work out there, get online, have a website, be on the places, Instagram and wherever, where people are looking at artwork, and try to have a presence, and just trying to keep polishing your skills and try to get good, because nowadays you're competing against the entire world that wants to draw comic books, and you have to be really at the top of your game to get work nowadays, where when I started, I was able to kind of learn on the job and improve as I went along. It's much more competitive today.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show, Bob. And I know you're not going to have many Comic Con appearances coming up, but folks wanted to reach out to you, maybe buy some prints. What's the best way to do that?
I have a website. They can always go to my website, bobmcleod.com. I also have a Patreon page that I would love for people to check out, where I'm posting a lot of my artwork all the time, and special things that the general public isn't going to have access to. And then I'm on Facebook occasionally and Instagram. So I'm around. They can find me.
Awesome, folks. So, yeah, you heard it here first. Just go ahead and go to www.bobmcleod.com. Check out some of the prints that he has available. He's got some really, really nice, cleaned up stuff from Craven's Last Hunt, as well as some of the various other titles that he has worked on. So Bob, I do want to thank you once again for coming on the show, and thanks for all the hard work you put in over the years, making the comics medium something special for kids like me growing up.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I've just been very fortunate to work in this industry and have the career that I have. So I'm happy to be your guest. Thanks very much.
Awesome. And yeah, folks, don't forget to check out that website, www.bobmcleod.com, because we are out of here.